Okay, we are live. Welcome everybody to our Bright Future series with Ownstream, where we're talking about various things related to building a new Earth. And this is episode, actually, I don't know what number. Seven
Lucky
in the
number
series. And we're so delighted and just overjoyed to have Chris Bale with us today for this special session. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Well, Chris and I have a connection outside of just this interview series. I'll just be fully transparent at the outset. Chris is a coach of mine and has helped me easily more than any coach I've ever had. I've had teachers in the past with whom I've kind of cultivated specific kind of relationships with, which can go on for years. But I first became aware of Chris a couple of years ago and was immediately drawn to his message, how clear it was, how grounded it was, how kind of earthy and of the body it is. I think that'll be translated through this conversation. It wasn't kind of mystical and far away. It was very immediate, very present, very real. And that's what drew me to him, amongst many other things. So when we began to contemplate this series, obviously he was on the short list of people we wanted to discuss this kind of movement we're in, this transition we're experiencing as a society from an old world to, let's hope, a new, more upgraded one. And Chris is obviously very much in the mix of supporting that transition in the way that he does. And so we want to kind of evoke from him his messaging around that today and some clarity around some things that I think are very, very puzzling and challenging for people that we highlighted in much of our preview writing about this. So, but anyway, Chris, just for us to kind of get particularly for people who don't know you or are not familiar with you, a little background. And I would love to hear as you kind of chronicle that, however you do, any kind of role models along the way, or maybe anti-role models. In our society, maybe we need to talk about anti-role models and positive role models, but I'll hand that off to you first.
Sure. Well, thank you for the introduction. So my background in terms of the work that I do now and the way that I do it, there were some different factors that were a part of molding or shaping that. The first aspect to my work is everything I'm doing fundamentally is coming from a focus on the energetics, on understanding what we need to do and how we need to do it in order to start to be actually able to live our lives in a much more embodied and connected way. And my initial background is acupuncture, it's Chinese medicine, it's going very deeply into a lot of the Taoism that kind of surrounds those different aspects of the practice. And from that entry point, at the same time, I was always, attempting to figure out how can I navigate through my own sensitivity and be here as a man who is able to remain firm, able to stand up for something. In a type of life where I'm feeling everything always, all the time. So these were kind of happening side by side for quite a while when I was initially working with people in clinic with acupuncture and different energetic healing modalities. And the other side, I was working with men initially in terms of just getting a deeper understanding of masculinity and what it even means, to be here as an embodied man. So slowly but surely, these two worlds started to merge. And I started noticing that huge levels of dysfunction around how we relate with our male energy and how we relate with our feminine energy, both in a male and a female body. So that kind of brought me deeper into the work that I do today. You guys are muted. I can't. So yeah, that kind
Let me share something with you. We're getting
Yes.
some feedback that it's hard for folks to hear you. Maybe if you come closer to the screen.
Okay, sure.
Good.
Is this a little bit better?
We'll have to wait and hear from people because you hear sound okay to us.
What I can do is use headphones. This may help.
Sure. We'll just keep people updated. We're typing into the chat.
Sure. So that should be a lot.
Wow. That's
Okay.
Very good.
Dorothy just walked out of the house and it's full color.
All right. Beautiful. So what I was saying was these two aspects of my work started to come together. So then I really started to move into masculine, feminine dynamic work, and also accompanying that with energetic work, body work, work around consciousness, awareness, and really just waking up, because a fundamental core issue that is deeply prevalent right now is the fact that men and women find it so challenging to get along.
Mm.
And not just, at a micro level, but also collectively at a macro level, energetically. The masculine and the feminine really lacks innate understanding on the simplicities of what's needed for us to be able to support one another in the most powerful way. In a time where, we're really being twisted up and distorted and perverted.
Yeah. Maybe we can dive right into that.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Because that was kind of our first area we wanted to dive into with you, Chris, is kind of what has happened to the man and the woman in our society and those distortions. And maybe you can walk us a little bit through. I think any of us who have been in any relationship can relate, I think, to what you just said about men and women. And I've certainly had my own, waves of that from my own conditioning, but I'd love to hear you talk about the kind of like the classic distortions we see among men and women. What are we suffering from? Maybe you can take that man and woman, maybe we can dig into that with you a bit here.
Sure, of course. When one side of the polarity is sacrificed or is brainwashed or is lied to, disconnected from their essence, it immediately has a knock-on effect to the other polarity. So, just to preface all of this, it's not that, someone dropped the ball first. It's not that, men messed up first and then, the women followed, or vice versa. When one thing loses itself, another balance is gone. And we start to take it out on each other, because how we're being taught and how we're being trained to live our lives is that we're looking for happiness in another person. We're being taught to project our ideals onto another person's life, and then we're expecting that person to show up and fill us in the way that we're not being able to fill ourselves. So I think this is how it's all being sold to us, is that we're not enough, we're not worthy of love, we're not worthy of abundance. So society comes and controls us, dysfunctionalizes us, and then tries to sell us the cure. Mm. Now, how it's dysfunctioning men and women is men are being turned into women and women are being turned into men. Mm. That's the clearest way to say it from an energetic standpoint. That's my reflection on it. And you'll see that men these days are far more comfortable taking the feminine posture, and not even a healthy feminine posture, a dysfunctional feminine posture, where he's seeking to be mothered. He moves around in his life like an adult male looking for another mother. And because women are also going through their process in this, and she has been pulled away from her heart, and she's been convinced that first and foremost, her heart is fragile and it can be broke, which is the biggest lie that has ever been served to women, because your hearts are the biggest things that are here on this planet. And this is what we really need leading, the development that we're going through right now. So with this level of brainwashing, we start to lose contact with ourselves, and we start to be perverted internally. Men are being told how big, bad, and dangerous they are. But the men who are doing the things that look big, bad, and dangerous, they're coming from a place of brokenness. That is not mature, strong masculinity. That is not balanced, compassionate masculinity. That is pain. And from the woman's side of things, when a woman, and I'm not saying this, because I need to be very clear with my wording, that when I speak on what I feel is needed for women, I'm not a woman. That's clear.
But what I'm doing is functioning as a messenger, and the amount of women that I've worked with over these years, I'm simply sharing what has been expressed to me over and over again. And if a woman is not being seen by the men, and I mean really seen, I mean receiving his presence in a way where she feels safe enough to fully open and to fully be in her heart, she's never going to be happy. There's always going to be a level of underlying fatigue that is driving her forward. And the thing that's driving her more than anything is her fear of not being safe, because she looks around and sees the state of masculinity and the state of men on the planet and said, well, if I lay back and take a rest, this man doesn't have it because he doesn't even have himself. So how am I supposed to trust him? So, there's a lot of different angles that I can approach this with in terms of my expression. But and if you want to steer it back to anything, please feel free to do so. But it's a level of distraction. That is the biggest fundamental weapon that is being used against us right now, and on men more than anything. Because you don't need to distract the women. You distract the men, women suffer because of that.
And so to kind of to understand that kind of maybe from a different perspective would be a question of, and I'll use this word, it may not be the best word, but it's the first one that comes to mind, but the role. Like if we think about a natural man, a natural woman, someone really without this baggage, a man not looking for his mother, a woman not fatigued in this deep chronic way, what is kind of their natural energy, their natural state, their natural tendency, not wanting to stereotype, but to try to get to the heart of the matter. So we know maybe if we know kind of where we are and then where we're going, we can maybe talk about the space in between.
Sure. So a natural man and a natural woman, what that looks like is an individual whose only governing system is their internal law, where they're basically here to get out of the way and to serve the internal energy flow that's moving through their body, to serve their spirit, God, their source, whatever word that you're most comfortable using. But it's not doing it from an idea perspective. And that's the glitch that I see in kind of New Age spirituality, is there's a lot of fluff, there's a lot of romanticism, there's a lot of ideas about spirituality, but when it comes to the earthly groundedness in it, it's not there. And because of that, we actually disconnect further from our humanity and from our primal intelligence. So I would say that a natural woman and a natural man are individuals who have a felt sense contact with their internal way. Their way might be, I feel to get up and go left today, or I may feel to get up and go right today. They go in that direction, and they're not here to explain why they do that or to make apology for doing that or to shut themselves down in doing that, because that's the bigger issue. We're so policed that we're taught to police ourselves. And the level of dysfunction that we see, it's only because people have been pulled away from that innate governing system. We're not here to be anything for anybody other than in service to what's put us here. Again, not from a religious standpoint, not from an idea standpoint, from a visceral standpoint. And to have contact with that, it's about coming back down into the body. That is the way in. You will never get there through your mind. But that's what's held to high regard, right? That's what we're all looking for, is to have the quickest mind, the most intelligent mind. The mind doesn't know intelligence. The mind is information. The mind is intellect. The body is intelligent. The mind is imagination. The body or the mind is thinking. The body is feeling. So our connection to that, what I'm going to call godliness in us, the thing that's here that knows more than us, that is being expressed to us through our intuition. To feel your intuition, you have to be at home.
I know you do. There's a couple places I want to go with this. I think Stephen probably
Feel
is
free.
too, but
Yeah.
I know you do a lot of work, Chris, with people about getting them back into their bodies. Can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe even the difference, assuming there is one, between working with a man in getting into his body and working with a woman? Because I know you do both. Maybe tell us a little bit about that work and how it works to transmute some of the patterns you're talking about.
So my work with men, it's a deep process, because with men, we need an initiatory type of experience where we're feeling and seeing the embodiment of the freedom that we're looking to acquire in another first. There's a lot of different types of work that I do with men, and a lot of different words I use and all of that stuff. But what's been reflected back to me as being the most valuable is men consistently reflecting back to me, before meeting you, I never had permission, because I'd never seen it. I had never seen someone as a man fully unapologetic, fully in his, what I'm going to call cock energy, while also being connected to his heart and actively allowing himself to express his truth in a fierce way and in a loving way. And that's not to say that, I'm better than anyone. It's nothing about that. It's simply seeing someone who has put in the work to come back to themselves. And as men, because we're so dysfunctionally feminized, because we're raised by women who themselves are not understanding what a little boy actually needs in order to flourish and grow up as a well-functioning man. So she starts to raise a codependent little boy who grows up to be a codependent big man. So that's the biggest thing that I do with men. It's very clear, very direct communication, where I poke him, where I assist him in exposing himself to himself, because we're here to see as men. Men need to see. We're the conscious element of life. So it's really about waking that up and jarring that in him and assisting him through that process without holding his hand too much, but also letting him know I'm there if he really needs me. But a lot of it is about exposing all the ways that he has been lying to himself, all the ways that he has choked down on his power, all the ways that he has allowed everyone but himself tell him how to be in his life. That is what strips a man of his own power, of his own meaning, of his own ability to protect community, women, and children. Because now we have men with their hands in their pockets, looking down at the ground, kicking the can along the floor, because he's got no meaning, he's got no purpose. Because now women are independent. So that's the other aspect of it. He's like, well, where's my role now? And women want to do it all. And, that's beautiful that they have that opportunity. And we've opened that scope up for women to really go into what they need to go into and want to go into. But in many instances, that's now also causing problems with her, because now it's almost as if she's bitten off something that she no longer wants to chew on. She's like, shit, I don't really want to be here doing it like this. I just want to be equal. But it was never intended for a woman to do what a man does, and it's never intended for a man to do what a woman does. And to think so is just foolish of us. And this is what needs to be recognized for us to really be able to come back in love with each other. And if nobody else is saying it, then I got to say it and take the heat for it.
Well, can I jump in with one more thing?
Yes.
There? I want to hear about how you work with women too, but I want to say right here, because this is the other thing I wanted to say, that I love what you just shared, because I'm certainly of the generation of women that were taught that we can do anything. Of course we can, we know that, but in this very masculinized way of I had a very masculinized upbringing about trying to be at the top of schools, professions, whatever. And it's never made me happy. It's never been. And Stephen and I have played those kind of opposite roles, certainly in our relationship. And so it's something that resonates. I said to Stephen that I was really excited for this conversation, in part because it's a bit triggering for me still, that I can hear what you just said. And I, even as aware as I am of my own patterns, that it's conditioning, and that I even believe what you're saying, it's still a little triggering for me. So I'm really grateful for that, because I've
Well,
been
I'm
so
grateful for you
taught.
sharing that.
Yeah, I've been so taught that, you know, that I could be equal to a man in this way that is doesn't feel natural to me, I guess.
Mhm.
Not in the way
Yes.
it does.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's an important reflection, because I feel a lot of, you know, what I say landing on people in certain ways, and at times there's the lack of awareness of what it really means, so it just becomes a trigger and it just becomes projection. But I'm only here for freedom, and that's for both sides. But I get the truth is prickly at times. Especially when it's coming from a male. That's the other aspect of it right now on the planet. Yeah. Which I totally, I get why. And I've signed up for it. So I'm okay with it. So for the women, just coming back to how I work with women, it's quite a different experience, because I could sit here and have a conversation with a woman for hours, and it can be beneficial, and it, can open things, and it can assist in bringing more clarity in different ways. But what I started to realize is that it really doesn't matter if she's not having an experiential felt sense of her being pulled from her mind back down into her body. Because so much of the fatigue and the suffering that women are experiencing right now is because she is locked in her head all the time. She rarely gets any moment's rest to be able to drop down into her sensuality, to her femininity, to be able to feel the restorative water quality to who she is, that actually has her be so magnetic and able to manifest on the planet. So my work with women is an experiential thing, where I'm doing energy work, whether it's in person or whether it's over the phone. It really makes no difference, because with energy, there is no such thing as space or even time in that matter. So the other aspect of this is, my job with women is ridiculous. I shouldn't have this work. The reason I say that is because any woman should be able to walk outside of her house, look left and right, see any male in her community, and walk over and ask him for a hug, or be able to just be in his arms and let go of anything she needs to let go of. What I'm seeing with women who come to me, it's almost like a pressure cooker, where she has become so burdened, where she's had nowhere to discharge all of this emotional trauma, all this mishandling that's been done onto her. So she then has to carry it around in her body, which in fact disembodies her, because it's too uncomfortable to be in there and to feel that without moving it. So if men were doing their work, which is the purpose of this, and this is really what I want to see, then the man would be vibrating energetically in a way that activates her, in a way that wakes her body up when she's in his vicinity. And this is not hocus pocus or magic. This is just basic life polarity. And my request and my invitation to women before ever deciding to be with a man is, make sure that she's choosing the man through her body, that she's allowing her body to let her know whether this man feels safe, whether this man even has the energy to arouse her and to open her and to activate her and to evoke things in her. So that is my work with women. It's just being there in a very clean, integral, energetic way, where I'm simply there to be loving with her in a way that she may have not experienced it before. And what I mean is that I'm not looking for anything in return. And most women, when men reach out to do something, it usually is because he's looking for something in return. So she's immediately guarded. So I'm using everything that, let's say, I've acquired the ability to hold energetically, and I'm bringing it to her for the session. And that starts to open and activate and wake up a lot of dormant energy and femininity in her body. So she starts to really get a very visceral felt sense experience of what it feels like to be a woman. Because when a woman is not in contact with what it feels like to be a woman, now she's just having to think that she's a woman. And it's a very different experience. Again, all of the things that I'm saying can be very triggering for many, many people. And again, I just want to clarify that what I'm sharing, it needs to be clear, because this is my role here. It needs to be delivered in a direct way, because there's so much fucking fluff on this planet that it's keeping us all almost brain dead.
Mm.
So we need to be jolted. And I feel the masculine, that's such a powerful part of what we're here to do, to say no more.
Yeah. So you spoke earlier about an initiatory process, and I'm curious, related to men, your work with men. So
Yes.
the journey of clearing, let's call it, the journey of clearing these blocks, these old programs, these malicious ideas that we've been fed, for men and women sounds a little different. And for a man, I'll ask the male focused questions. You ask the female focused questions. But for a man, like that notion of an initiatory journey, just as soon as I hear it, I kind of get to the front of my seat. I'm like excited by that. That sounds promising. That sounds real. That sounds meaningful. Like that will have an impact. Tell us about that. Like maybe your own initiatory journey, if there was one, or how it's played out in people that you've worked with. And as I'm asking this, I'm recognizing that this is a part of ancient traditions, whether that's walkabout or the vision quest or whatever. And in this day and age, we might not be able to unplug for 3 or 4 weeks and go do something. Maybe we can, and maybe that's the way to do it. But talk about kind of the nuances of like upgrade or bringing that into a modern situation.
The idea of unplugging and having a very set container for that process, as was done in older, tribal times and community times, that worked because the person was then leaving. The man was realizing his own self-reliance and his own ability to survive on his own accord without his mother. And then he would come back and he would be celebrated. The difference between today and then was, back then, that person or that man or that young boy was re-entering a community that was not insane.
Big difference.
That community had been built on a hierarchy of sanity, of this process for both men and women in different ways. So now that we don't have that container, yes, we can create it in men's groups and all of that. But in my experience doing the work that I do, it takes 1 to 3 years for a man to wash the insanity out of his consciousness, out of his psyche, and out of his body. And it is something that needs to be committed to over quite a long period of time. And even when he's clean to a certain level, at any point he's up for grabs again if he falls asleep for a moment, because right now we're in a time where everyone is pulling at us. Everyone is wanting to consume us and to have control over us. So what the initiatory process looks like for a man, the first phase tends to be him coming to terms in a oh shit type of a way at what's really been going on in his life, how he's really been carrying himself, what he's been allowing go on around him, all the ways he's been hiding and not facing his fears, all the ways he's been dependent on that relationship with his mother right into his 50s, 60s, 70s. Sometimes it never stops long after the mother is physically after leaving the planet. Once that moment is recognized and he has a very real understanding of what he has actually created in his life, then comes the process of him having to stay in his body through different practices, whether it's Qigong, which is something I always recommend to men in terms of being in the body and having a closer connection to that, whether it's meditation, whether it's using some embodiment practice to plug into his day where he has a consistent felt sense contact with himself as he starts to feel all of his fears, all of his traumas, all of his insecurities coming up, and then learning to surrender to himself, learning to surrender to his internal woman the same way that a man wants an external woman to surrender to him. That's another issue for women, right? Is men come to me and say, oh, how do I get a woman to surrender? My question to him is, what have you surrendered to? Because if you haven't surrendered to something greater than yourself, it's not safe for her to do that. So our process is a lot of internal surrendering to our ego. And through that, it starts to open the body. It starts to soften us. Let me re-clarify that. It starts to sensitize us rather than soften. But in order for a man to stand up firm, he needs to fall down soft. That's the only way he can actually begin to really see the reality of the situation. And I get that, you know, what I'm giving you here is not a very clear ABC step-by-step system, because it's just not that way. It does not work like that. Every man has a slightly different process that he goes through. But it's always about feeling first and then following. He needs to feel himself, either his power or all the hurt and the misery that has been done onto him based on the fact that he has not stepped up to his power. Then he follows that. But society is not set up for men, because so much of what is here would not exist if men were actually here being present. So, you know, I hope that gives a little bit of clarity into the situation. But I just want to say the very main aspect of this, the main aspect is if a man is still connected to his mother in any capacity, in terms of if she's guiding his life or her voice is inside of him guiding him in any way, and he's living his life to please and appease her, and he's not able to speak up about who he is and what he needs and what he wants and the direction he's taking his life with his mother, he's never going to be able to have a place of clarity for any woman he comes in contact with. He's going to be useless for healthy femininity, because she needs his presence, she needs his fury, she needs his dangerousness, so she can be soft. And he'll never be able to walk in that if he doesn't disconnect himself from the child posture inside of himself. And that is done through falling down, opening the arms, breathing into his body, and feeling the depth of compromise that he's basically done to himself. Because it's disgusting. Mm. At least that was my experience when I saw what I was peddling. Couldn't even look at myself. I was so deeply ashamed of, for use of a better term, how much of a bitch I had been as a man. And I say that for the men listening, and I don't use that word in a derogatory sense, but men will feel that when I say that, you know, what that feels like, how that resonates in your body. But that's what I felt like. I felt totally castrated. And only then can you actually start to make a change. But we need not be here to be politically correct, because it's not going to help us.
One little follow-up on that, just to kind of bring that into something very specific.
Sure.
Right now, I don't know what it's like where you are, but where we are, we're being told to wear masks constantly. Mm-hmm. I mean, in some states, we're being told to wear masks in our own homes.
Yes.
And so when you go back and you're to repeat some of the things that you just said about this fury and about, you know, the world wouldn't be the way it is if men could really be men. How do you respond to this whole mask scenario as a man? Do you wear them when you go out? Do you not wear them? And then how would you say that men should face this?
So this is almost me telling a man how to be a man, and that's not what I do. My message is feel into it yourself. How does it feel to you? What does it bring up in you? It doesn't matter what I say. It makes no fucking difference what I say. What matters is how it makes you feel in your body. I can share my experience of it in a way that almost may seem a little bit disconnected or ignorant. My choice and my understanding is that it doesn't impact me because it's not for me. I'm not a part of the system they're attempting to control. They can do whatever they want to do, but I'm over here and I would like other people to start coming over here. And I know many people are coming over here in whatever way that means for them. But same with the election stuff and all these things that people get so worked up over. It's like, yes, it's a problem if you're a part of it, but you don't need to be a part of it. You're your own law here, and you get to decide how you want to move through your life. Now, if I'm walking into a supermarket here or a shopping mall because I need to get something and someone says, put a mask on, will I do that? Yes, but then I'll take it right back off. I'll play the system as much as I have to play the system. I've been doing it for years and I'll continue to do it because I'm also in the vicinity of the system. And there's different stances that we need to take, I feel. One of the stances that we can take as men is violence. We can move into violence and destruction, and we can physically, traumatically take back what we need to take back. Now, what I would say the conscious man would attempt to do first is group up with a lot of intelligent, conscious men in a way where we can intelligently start to take back. I don't even want to say power, but give back power and control to community and to individuals and to sovereignty. But it's all based in fear. And that's why it can control people so much. I'm like, sure, if you're afraid, wear a mask. I totally support anyone doing anything that makes them have a more enriched life, but do not even attempt for a second to tell me how to do my life. And that's what we need from men. Because, and again, it's really important for men to hear this, because this is not just you and me. This is men in the police force. This is men, we're all men, right? And we have dropped the code of honor so low that now men think they can go out and abuse and they can manipulate and they can kill people of color just because they're in a state of power or they're in a perceived role of authority. These men are not being checked by men who are supposed to be leading this. That is the problem. The men in power are not of intelligence. They're not of embodiment. They're not integrated. They're little boys who are playing out traumatic patterns. But one, conscious man, to use that term again, can't just do all of it himself. We need a grouping. We need a community of men who can overthrow whatever needs to be overthrown. We also have to be real about that. But men need to be checked. And I mean this from the micro to the macro. So even men listening, if you're in your friend circle and you see another man do something that's out of integrity, stop laughing with him about it. Step up and call him on it. Because otherwise that starts to infect community, women and children, and then it stops being safe for anybody here. But men, we need to be here willing to die for something. You will not have meaning until you have established what you are a firm no on. If a man doesn't know that, then everyone can pull him around by his nose like a donkey. Right now, that's what a lot of men look like. Donkeys. And I was one of them. So I'm hoping this is triggering and poking and ruffling feathers where they need to be ruffled. Men need to not be concerned with being liked or not liked.
This is oh, go ahead, Chris.
No, you can go.
I was going to say, this issue of sovereignty has been a great interest in our community right now, among others, of course, given what's happening. But I love how you said just so clearly, that's not my world. I'm not in that world. And I think that's something that a lot of people in our community are navigating right now is how do they Are they in another world? How do they live in another world? They feel they are in another world, but maybe they're still kind of living in this world. And maybe that's why the sovereignty doesn't feel so clear. Like we have a desire to feel, we know in us that we are sovereign of this and that this is not our system, but we are still of it in some way. And I wonder if you can speak to this, how to step out of that, or like, what is that journey like? And is that different for a man and a woman? I'm curious, because you've spoken about this is what men do. And I don't know if you mean that in a general way or actually men. And so is that different, stepping into our natural law as men and women? How do we do that? And is it different for men and women?
Great question. I'd like to first speak to maybe the logistics of just that, disconnecting from the system. You will first have to start to, go through the process of unraveling and signing off all the handouts and all the support that the government and that the system pulls us in with. Because that's how they pull us in. Like, oh, we'll give you more money. We'll give you a house. We'll give you all these things, but then your soul is ours. So it really depends on, do you want to be out here alone? For me, it was never an option. For me being out here alone, and when I say alone, I mean not a part of that system, was the only way that I could trust moving forward. Because I can trust this, because I'm with this every day. And again, my work as a man is to get to a point of trusting and relying on myself, so that I know that I can navigate no matter what comes up. And it really is essentially the same for women. But the thing is that men have to go first. Because if men don't go first, then women cannot come to the forefront and lead it, because it won't be safe enough for her. And it's totally unfair that just so happens to be the way that it is. But as men, we're just here to initiate and take the lead with the initiation. But coming out of the system is going to be a deeply heart-based practice. And that's where women come in. And it doesn't matter what is being led. There should always be a woman right beside the male, and there should be a male right beside the woman. So there is both forms of intelligence coming together to navigate this. As men, we're very good at visioning outwards. We're very good at creating and building stuff up in certain ways and having a mission or a structure in that way. But we'll miss all the immediacies in that moment. We'll just fall over, we'll step in the puddle because we didn't even know there was a puddle there. So for women, I really feel there's such the beauty in femininity and the miraculousness in womanhood is being able to tend to the immediacies of life, moment to moment to moment to moment, and choosing whether or not to bring love to it and to bring compassion to it and bring support to it, or to attack it or to judge it or to close down around it. But that's a great litmus test, because if a woman is closing down to something, the man needs to look at what he's doing, because a woman will only open to something that is true. She will only open to love. She will only really truly support something that is here for a greater cause. And that's that wise woman, that priestess archetype that men are just in awe of, and that she walks into a room and everything in that room starts to transform based on the courage that she has to actually be in her heart in such a free-flowing way. And I hope that was clear, because I know I speak in an abstract way sometimes. And I also want this to be practical. But for women, my invitation is, we need you here feeling. A woman who doesn't feel does not know. So she really needs to either take the time herself to come back down into her body and start to really connect with and honor the intuitive side of herself, and her tears and her pain and all the ways that she does not feel she's being met, so she can get loud. Women need to get louder and louder and louder and bigger and bigger and bigger, not because it's something difficult to do, because, Teresa, you already know how gigantic you are. And the biggest complaint that women have is, oh, well, I don't want to be too much. because men keep reflecting to me that, oh, you're too much. You need to calm down, cool it, be quieter. But what he fails to realize is he's literally shutting her down where she is the most powerful. So for women, I really love to hear and see women standing up and asking for what she needs, asking for what the community needs, what her children need, what the earth needs. This is the compassion that's going to actually be steering the ship. So men can be behind it with swords. So we have something to stand for, but women are the intelligence, the heart-based intelligence in this. And again, this is honoring each other's polarity in a way that will absolutely change everything. And for women to be here in an embodied way where you're allowing your body to speak. So if a man is in your vicinity or something is in your vicinity and your body's a no to it, then literally, just let it go in the most uncalibrated way. And if the man moves around you in a way that's beautiful to you, you're like, yeah. And he starts to see, wait a second, she's being transparent here. She's being receptive. The man starts to feel more powerful, more at meaning. He has a higher purpose now because he's actually getting a reflection of himself. So women close and men hide away, and then we disconnect from each other. So the other side of this, just to finish this point, and one of the things that women will actually say to me when I invite them into this practice, just as a practice of life, is, oh, if I really reflect the truth in that moment, I don't want to hurt his feelings because he's fragile and I don't want to upset him or, make him feel less like a man if I'm like, ugh, no, not like that. But what I have to share with you is that you want a man, right? You want a mature, empowered man. So you cannot have a mature, empowered man who is here like a king, as a king for you and for the planet, if you treat him like a little boy. He needs to know how he is showing up. He needs to see an accurate reflection of how he is moving through his life. And you women are the biggest mirrors for that. And I always know where a man is at in his process because he can tell me all the amazing stuff that he's done in his work. And you take that man and you drop him in front of a powerful woman and he's like, oh. And then you know what's up. Yeah. And that's the beauty of the feminine. She will expose stuff through her love because that's the transformative quality to her. But to be there, she has to be willing to feel, and she has to be willing to question the current paradigm of what it means to be a strong woman, because it's not strong at all. The independent woman thing we're seeing is not what a strong woman is. It's what a woman who's been programmed and told she's not good enough in her femininity, so she needs to leave her house and be a man. That is what's been depicted to our little girls and young women on the planet. Femininity is about feeling. The masculine is 20% of the power and the feminine is 80% of the power. And I'm saying this as a man who tracks both of those energies in myself. A man who knows himself knows that the feminine energy in him is so much more powerful. The masculine is the hammer. It will get stuff done with precision when it needs to be done, and then we can fall back into compassion, into restorativeness, into connection.
Chris, just to kind of, I want to bring in a comment that somebody shared in the chat, actually. There's a lot of
Great feedback.
Really great feedback in the chat. But would you read that one?
Yeah, I was just wanting to talk about the balance of masculine and feminine in us. So this is a great question. What about developing our deep feminine? This is coming from a woman, just so you know. What about developing our deep feminine as well as our healthy masculine as individuals and become energetically agile and playing with polarity as the moment requires?
Absolutely essential, because that is the integrated woman and that is the integrated man. I'm never for just focusing on one side, because that in itself is lacking, but it's actually creating balance between both of these sides. Why I'm so direct in terms of, man masculinity, woman femininity, is because these are the parts of us right now that have been most perverted. These are the parts we have to first focus on, because just by doing that, a man will have no choice but to feel more of his femininity. A woman working on her femininity will be forced to have some level of masculine holding now that she's becoming even more vivacious and sensual and felt in herself. Otherwise, she'll just, be up in the sky. So that's a great question. And it's an important question because it allows me to also speak to the importance of that. It needs to be integrated.
Cool. So as a man, I think, and I know women have their own distorted lens through which the concept of love is understood, portrayed, acted out, demonstrated, the way it's understood and the way it's then given. Maybe you could speak about the distortions that each, like a man and a woman, typically hear about the exchange of love, and then how that's played out between them in relationship, both kind of energetically, but also even sexually.
Yes. You can let me know which way you'd like me to go with this, but I could begin with what love is in its healthiest form for a man.
I think that's great, because we would have gone right there next. So let's start there.
Okay, so, and it is a very important question, because men are being weakened through this expectation from women who are in what I call princess pose. Women who demand a lot, but show up very little, who expect a lot, but does not show up in her own truth, in her own heart, in her own willingness to feel. As men, we don't love like women, but men see the movies and the media and the bumbling guy who's, romanticizing and chasing and fawning after the woman until she eventually swoons and drops and gives in. And now everything is perfect and there's no polarity, but somehow they're happy. So these are all fantasies that men need to really be aware of. And they need to be exposed as not real, and things don't actively function like that. It drains us as men hugely when we're asked to be in our heart more. If it's a man who has not done the integral work to actually have a rooted stance in his genitals, in his positive pole energetically, in what I'm going to call his God center, his creative center, a man needs to be moving from this place in his life in a healthy way. Because as men, this is how we get to our hearts. Men get to their heart through their penis. This is why women say, oh, he just wants to have sex all the time. Why does he just want to have sex all the time? And because the man doesn't have a conscious understanding of why, he doesn't know how to explain to her that because I love you, basically. I love you at this part of my body. And this brings me to my heart. And you teach me how to love more. So as men, coming back to the initial stage of this, our love is our presence and our clarity. That's basically it. And I'm going to add care onto that. Our presence, the level of clarity that he has in his own life first, because if he's carrying a jumbo container full of confusion, then he's not going to be able to be there as a source of clarity for her. He's only going to be confusing her more, and she will feel his field and his general beingness as something that's just flailing around all the time. And she will never be able to relax in her nervous system around that. So as men, we love a woman by bringing her our presence and our clarity, and through those, we offer her care. Because if there is no presence and there is no clarity, but you're holding her, you're not caring for her. You're gripping onto her. Yeah. And that's the simple fundamental of for love as us as men. We don't really need to get caught up in the romantic gooiness that comes with relationship. And as enjoyable as it is, and as much as women actually ask for that, when she gets that, it lacks something for her. She tries to shake it off. She doesn't actually want it. She's just been programmed to think she wants it. She just needs your presence. She just needs to be able to trust you. She needs to feel the integrity and the clarity. So if that helps the men listening to ideally focus maybe a little bit elsewhere on a way where he can be of more benefit. But it's not his fault, because we've totally been brainwashed.
And then for women, how does it naturally flow for a woman unbound by the toxic messages? Yeah.
Receptivity, transparency, where in every moment she's letting the man know, the space know exactly what is moving in her, because she is dancing and moving her body and breathing and expressing and singing and shouting and throwing a pot across a room and then being in orgasm and in bliss and being in that level of presence and devotion. Because for women, it's about devotion. A woman wants to be deeply devoted because it actually nourishes her water and her heart and her meaning so much more. But as men, we've become so uninspiring to the feminine that now she's walking around like, I want to devote to something. But as soon as a man comes along, and I've had this experience requesting devotion, and she's like, I'm not going to devote myself to you. I don't need a man. And then she's in another place because that's where she thinks she needs to be protected. So, as a man, you can love her through that. You can love her into a place of trust. And that's the only way you can really bring a woman to trust. Most men will say, trust me. And she's like, I can't. I just can't trust you. She's not supposed to trust you. You're supposed to prove it to her over time and time and time of you showing up consistent, where you say what you mean and you mean what you say. So there's no longer a doubt in her beingness that I can trust this man because he's proved it. It needs to be proved because she has been dealt with by so many men who've said one thing and done another thing. So many men who have just dropped her. And as a man, if you drop yourself, because women need to look at men, you need to look at how a man relates to his own life before you ever reach out to him. You need to see how he does his own life, because that's how he's going to do you. And challenge him, challenge men. Because if he fumbles on the first challenge, you can move on. you found a dud. And I don't mean to be insensitive, but this will allow us as men to wake up, because as men, we will wake up more and more when we see women actively having a standard of impeccability, because he's not going to have any loving. He's not going to have any connection, because no woman will actually want to be with the brand that he's bringing to her.
One thing we're curious about, kind of building on to this, Chris, relationships nowadays seem to be a lot about reflection and triggering of these kind of distortions related to masculinity and femininity. At least that's been our experience of that. Is that everybody's, as far as we know, that and a lot of reflections of the mother and father relationships that you've kind of spoken to, at least related to the mother and the son. We didn't speak as much to father and daughter, but that's certainly been my case. We're curious, when distortions are cleared, what will relationships look like? What do relationships look like between a natural man and woman once they're clear, and what's the role of that relationship?
Harmonious in its chaos, because there's got to be chaos, because the more free two individuals are, the more energy that they have. So when you bring two of these forces together, you're going to have even more in the relationship. But the difference between an unconscious version of that and a clean conscious version is now all that chaoticness is no longer hidden from. It's no longer responded to via triggering, and instead it's harnessed and it's used for something of higher order. It's actually channeled. It becomes almost like church. There's an aspect of deep devotion where the love that's being created and the dedication between these two people is being directed into certain things in life, whether it's business or creating a change or raising children, and also freedom. There has to be innate, deep freedom where neither person feels obliged and neither person feels chained, but that they're both in a place in their lives where commitment is something of value. It's like, no, I choose to be committed. I choose to be in this union with this other person, and I choose to create something with them. And when anything comes up, it's immediately communicated on. And the man processes his stuff the way he needs to process his, which is not reacting and taking it out on his partner, but it's removing himself from the environment, processing what he needs to process, and then come back and debrief it for her. So she gets to see, he sees even more than he did yesterday. Because the dangerous part for a woman is not so much a man or what a man sees, it's what a man doesn't see. So that's a very supportive practice. And it also allows for greater health. And within that relationship dynamic, it means that a child has access to intelligence. And also that the child is not coddled and protected. Because this relationship will be very intense. Because to be here alive as a human singularly is intense. And nature is intense. And that's the nature of how we function. I really believe that we're supposed to be able to be in the center of intensity and surrender to it and ride the wave of it. The same way where a man is in sex with a woman, and the thing that men go through is, I'm going to be pulled into ejaculation. It's basically that principle, but it's spread out through his entire life in his relationship with the feminine. And with the woman, it's, can I truly deeply open to this person and be safe? Can I truly allow myself to be seen, or will I just be used up and discarded? And these are two core things. The man, freedom. He's like, I love this woman so much, but my freedom, what about my freedom? And for the woman, why won't the man choose to go deeper with me? I want to love more. I want to love more. I want to be closer. I want to be so intertwined that I'm inside of his cells because I want to know him and breathe him in and support him that deeply. We're very different, but we come together when we're choosing to support that in each other. In my experience, again, I'm not speaking for everybody. I'm just sharing what I've picked up.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your answer caused me to realize that I have this fantasy about what this kind of enlightened, for lack of a better term, relationship might look like. Like it's harmonious, but in a very kind of neutral way. Like we're not playing. Like our margins become so narrow, and I think what you're suggesting is that they actually expand.
Yes.
That we're kind of flowing all over the place, but still aligned, but much more expanded and expressive and unpredictable. Because nowadays, like, life is very predictable. It's very narrow. So it's just a very interesting kind of projection that I just saw myself having. Like, oh wow, no, it would be, of course, completely the opposite.
Yeah. Well, life is predictable in the ways that we've created it.
Yes.
In the superficial level, but in the feminine aspect of life, which is 80% of life, it's totally wild and unrelenting, and it's it's very intense. And this is what I feel we have to be willing to be courageous enough to start getting back into contact with, where we're not fearing it so much. And as long as the male principle has the stability, it doesn't matter where the relationship is being dragged. There's safety there. because the man is doing his inner God work. He knows that he is being guided through spirit as long as he's navigating this relationship. And the woman is basically just being there as a reflection of life, of aliveness, of nourishment. And it's not always going to be like that. Sometimes, you're not going to wash a dish and you'll hear about it and there'll be an argument, and then you'll learn even more and you'll become even closer. Conscious relating is muddy as fuck. And it's supposed to be, because otherwise it's boring, right? There's no growth in perfection. And I think the more conscious and the more embodied we become, the more powerful, the more real, the more gritty, and the more unconditional we can really be. Because we understand that grit is a part of life. Trauma is a part of life. And rather than trying to say, how can I never have trauma again? Or how can I never be in this situation again? We really need to start looking at, how can I better dance with this in the future? How can I learn its moves? How can I synchronize with it in a way where it can be discharged and digested and assimilated? That can never be done really through the mind. It's got to be the body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
we got it. Yeah, this is a question we were going to ask, and it just came up in the chat. In your experience, how does all of this show up in homosexual relationships?
Well, there's polarity in everything. In absolutely everything, there's polarity. If it's a same-sex relationship, then someone is going to be taking the plus, the outgoing, and someone is going to be in the receptive, naturally. But yeah, I'm never going to tell someone who they should and should not love. But it is important that there is an even deeper awareness to the importance of polarity in same-sex relationships, so that whatever is needed to be supported or whatever needs to be brought in order to support the healthy energetic aspect of the individual, that's definitely an important thing to look at. Because as men, you have two men come together. And again, I'm literally only speaking on the energetics of all of this, whether the man identifies as straight or homosexual. Whenever two men come together, there's two pluses. So there's a lot of charge. And that can create dysfunction. And how that would look is men in homosexual relationships really having difficulty being in the body during sex, because of the charge, because of the level of fire, the fire element that's involved. It can actually have men be a lot more in their heads. And what will often happen in these same-sex relationships is sex kind of gets more and more perverted from a disconnection standpoint, from toys, from play, dress up. It just gets more and more extreme. The same way someone goes into pornography. At the beginning, it's missionary, and before you know it, there's animals involved, and we're needing something more and more intense, basically, when we're doing sex with the mind. Mm. So in same-sex relationships, for men, it is very important that there's definitely a lot of heart stuff that is being supported in whatever way that needs to be. And for women, it's a little bit different, because women are far more connected, almost like a cord of yin. And what one woman starts to experience will immediately be shared by another. And I'll see this if I'm doing a gathering or a retreat, or I'm doing a demonstration of energy work, where I'll be working with a man, and it's a very cathartic experience as I'm opening his body up. And it will move people in the room in a certain way. But as soon as I start doing this work with a woman in front of, a group of people, I will literally see all the other women in the room starting to go into the same experience. Mm. Because women know this, that they're so yin based, that they're all connected. Femininity is just connected in that way. It's all receptive. So I never want to say that two women being with one another is healthier than two men being with each other, but it's definitely easier to navigate in terms of creating an energetic circuit. But as long as men are willing to really work with the healthy feminine in an embodied way, then then it should be absolutely fine. But I want to state healthy feminine, because what actually is seen in a lot of men in same-sex relationships is there's a lot of feminine dysfunction. The same in straight men, but it plays out in different ways in homosexual relationships. And that can also create a lot of drama and a lot of disconnection that needs to really bridge that gap for polarity reasons. And again, this is something that triggers so many people, but it's really important that it's spoken about.
Yeah, thank you. That's very clear.
Yeah, very clear.
I'm seeing a lot of really good questions. There's a few things we want to cover with you before we get to these great questions we're getting.
Sure.
One is sex. Let's kind of really dive into that. I think I was sitting here thinking about like what the two primary motivations for sex in the kind of surface level life that we live are: we want to have a baby, or somebody's horny, and that's
Release.
Yeah.
But there's more obviously to it than just those two motivations, and I'd like to hear you talk about that, the kind of deeper union longed for, and then alongside that, if it comes up, it'd be interesting to sort of talk about the healing work you've done around orgasm and the shame that both sides of this equation, the masculine and feminine, have accumulated for so long.
Sure. Sex is the thing that has been gifted to us that allows us the quickest and most immediate access to levels of cosmic, ethereal, godly frequencies that we would otherwise have no contact to. Sex is basically the connection between us and the divine, I feel. And even using that word, I flinch a little bit when I say the divine because of how much it's used in different ways. But if we're courageous enough to really be in sex, to feel everything, and I mean everything, ourselves and the other, then it creates a circuit that actually has us going into states of sexual intoxication and spiritual intoxication that can really be sustained as long as we choose to, the deeper that we come to know ourselves and our partner. Right now, the common way that we see sex is really just used to dissipate emotions and feelings. It's used the same way that we use alcohol, drugs, TV. We get a little itch and we immediately need to scratch it, and we scratch it and we let it go, and then we sit back on the couch or we get back to our life. Also, sex tends to be very friction-based, very focused on movement, which in my experience is actually the opposite of what sex really needs to be about for there to be a deep connection. And also with pornography on top of that, the level of education that we're getting is very perverted. And the quickest way to turn a community or a population or a society on their head and just totally confuse them is to confuse them around sex. And that has been achieved. But I hope for not much longer. And sex is very, very simple because we are very, very simple. Our suffering comes from our complicatedness, from our mind's desire to need a whole bunch of steps and rules and regulations in order to be able to internalize something as knowing it. Sex is something that we are. We don't need to look for it. We don't need to create it. We simply need to show up and wait for God to enter the room. That's my definition of sex. It's showing up, intertwining with a loved one, and waiting for God to enter the room. Because she'll always arrive. She'll always turn up. The difference is, and what sex is very powerful at doing, is showing us how we've actually cut ourselves off from that frequency in every other aspect of our lives. So if someone is not having powerful, potent, open sex, it's because they're not having that experience in the rest of their lives to begin with. It's because they've actually shut themselves down in so many other parts. Sex is the proof in the pudding. How we show up in sex is the litmus test for how you show up in the rest of your life. And it also immediately shows how you relate with yourself. So whether it's, me having sex with my partner, whether it's a man or a woman coming to me just for energy work, whether it's having a conversation with someone, you can always see and feel how a person is going to be in sex, because it's all the same energy. It's all the same thing. The major dysfunctions that show up are impatience. People are just impatient because we've been so stimulated mentally that we have been told that we can have things quick. And in sex, especially, women have been told that they need to get an orgasm and find the orgasm and move in a certain way or have a specific device in order to get an orgasm, without realizing that she is the orgasm. And the more that she starts to feel herself and surrender to herself first in deep ease and deep relaxation, and allowing her full authenticity to come up in her expression, in her sound, in her movement, in her breath, in her reclamation of just her own aliveness, that will show her the orgasmicness that she has access to. But the going and looking for it will just keep her disconnected from that part of her femininity and will keep her here in sex as a man. And it's not her fault, because as men, we're the initiators. And we're the ones who first start probably watching pornography as little boys. And then we have an idea of how we're supposed to use our genitals and how we're supposed to use it on a woman. And then a woman's first experience as a young girl or a young woman is with a man who not only has no understanding of her body and how to evoke the parts that are necessary for her, but also he has no understanding of his own body because he's been brainwashed. So now this dysfunction is played out on a collective level, and people are experiencing traumatic sexual relationships that they assume are normal. The amount of women who have reflected to me that so much of the trauma they're holding in their womb and their vagina is because they have laid down with their boyfriend or with their husband and had sex when she wasn't open to receiving it, when she wasn't in the mood to do it, when he hadn't made contact with her, he did not tune into her, but she felt obliged because that's what a good woman does. That is almost in every single woman I've ever met or had this conversation with. She has had that experience repeated on a certain level. So all of this fear, and then for men, we have the lack of, well, am I good enough? Am I hard enough? Am I big enough? Am I masculine enough? Can I give her loads of orgasms? Is she going to tell all of my friends or all of her friends how crap I was in bed? There's all these insecurities that start to play up on us as well. And then we're two people in a room, naked, touching each other, and we've got all our own stories and our own traumas that are being played out as we're attempting to release tension between ourselves. So in sex, what we really should, in my opinion, be doing is being fully accountable and taking full ownership for where we're at, for the experiences we've had, and attempting to not place blame, although that can be difficult in some instances, but coming into the room totally vulnerable and facing your partner totally vulnerable, totally exposed, totally open, having no direction in sex, having no end point in sex, having no idea of it finishes when we orgasm or when he ejaculates, and instead look at sex as a way to just be real with another person and just be there and start listening. Sex can be a practice of deep listening to your own body and to the other person's body that you're attempting to love upon. And if I have one piece of advice for people who, are engaging in sex in their lives, is to slow down everything. If you can, be totally still and don't even move and wait for whatever starts to come up. There may be trigger, there may be frustration, there may be judgment, there may be aggression. But if we can stay still with each other in lovingness and hold each other as we go through the things that we need to go through and let go of in order to come back to being fully human again, this will change the capacity and our potency that we have in our lives. Powerful sex is the most powerful supplement that we have access to. And when it stops being about friction and it starts being about vulnerability and devotion, it just becomes a whole other thing. But getting there, that's when all of our stuff comes up. And this is the make it or break it point. You either close up and walk away, or you choose to stay there with courage and allow your tears, allow your pain, allow your expression to really come up. It's exquisite. And it doesn't have to be challenging. It doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be complicated. So that would be my invitation.
Powerful. I'm going to look through, there's so many questions, but I really wanted to be tuned in with you on that, Chris. So I see them flying up in the chat over here.
Yeah, I definitely want to get to one asked at the beginning by Stacy. I'll just say the name because it's easier to find the one. Keep
Asked at the
scrolling
beginning.
up right there. But why don't we, I think there's one last big thing we'd like to have you cover from us. And that really relates to community, the arising hunger that people have for being in community with each other, coming together. And, you know, this has been played out in a lot of ways, all the way back to the 60s and 70s and communes and following gurus. And a lot of that didn't really work out.
No.
And so, like, I know many of our tribe feel this hunger, this longing to kind of come together in community. I'd like to see what you say about that. What is your perspective on that? Are we just, again, projecting out our needs onto others, wanting them to come around and form a safety net around me, for example? What is
Possibly.
what is the real longing? What is the a healthy vision, if you will, of community and people coming together, who may not necessarily be like blood family, but kind of finding a different relationship to family in the form of community?
It definitely is a point to mention what you mentioned, which is our desire for community coming from we're feeling alone and we're not willing to be in that aloneness to go through it. So we want to kind of crowd people around us to make us feel a lot safer than actually going through some of the things we need to go through. So to approach of that, or to approach, I feel, anything in a healthy capacity, we need to be able to be in both. We need to be able to spend time alone. And different people require different amounts of time to be alone. And some people almost feel as though they require no time alone. And that is the self-inquiry that we have to do to really have a deeper understanding of what works for us. Community is just innately important to us as human beings. I mean, this is how we've walked the earth for thousands and thousands of years. Has always been in community, in tribes, and that's how we've managed to band together to create and to build and to change the landscape of society and the world, and to do things at such a rapid pace, because we're very, very intelligent when we're embodied and when we have community. I feel now it's a little bit more challenging, without going into the whole social media and technology aspect of it, which is obvious. But I feel in community, there's always different roles for different people. And I see a lot of communities that come together these days, and they're all attempting to serve the same role. So it's very one-sided. It's just coaches, or it's, just milkmen, but it's the same people who are doing the same things. And I feel naturally community was never like that originally. There was people who were there to do very different things. And we were okay letting another person be magnificent in what they do without us wanting to just do what they do. And I know I'm veering a little bit off of it, but I think for community to be well-rounded and to be dynamic and to be a force, it needs to be multifaceted in terms of the types of people and what these people are actually bringing to the table in terms of their energy, their innate gifts, how they're put together and how they work. But community is very, very important. Absolutely. Because you can see what community can do. Government is community. It's just not a very positive type of community. It's a very disastrous type of a community with a hierarchy, which is normal. But we're not in it together, and that's the problem. So I don't really know if I've answered your question efficiently, but see, I've spent so much of my life actually having to separate myself from insanity in order to be able to see clearly. So for me, I come in and out of community as a service, and then I step out of it because I don't actually gain my nourishment by being directly in the middle of community. That's where I do my service, and I gain my nourishment outside alone so I can continue to clean and stay clear.
Is your sense that parts of this collective are ready for a community, a healthy kind of coming together like that, or is there still quite a bit of...
Or what would it take to get there?
Another few generations. I feel we're moving in the direction. I feel right now we're in a bridge generation.
Yeah.
And I feel we have all the I keep using this word, but the dysfunction of past years and the old school way of relating and doing things, and a lot of that being exposed, and a lot of this being spearheaded by younger generations, exposing a lot of the unjust behavior. So I feel right now we're definitely moving in that direction. There's definitely a lot of fluffiness and lashing out that's occurring that is definitely not a mature way of doing it. So I feel the older generation have such a clearer depth of work ethic and commitment to mastery and a commitment to time and a commitment to dedication. Whereas right now, the younger generation, I feel, have so many beautiful gifts like compassion and equality, but then they lack the connection to reality in terms of having their feet on the ground and realizing that no, humans are not just all pretty and fluffy, and perfection isn't a thing. That we need to be able to be in compassion even with the dirt underneath our fingernails. And that's the only way we can move forward. So I see a whole lot of people unable from past, and I see a whole lot of younger people unable to deal with the truth of life and the hardship of life and needing everything to be a certain way. But that's gonna wash itself out. And that's what life does, right? She shakes it out a little bit, and we're all tossed around, and we find our way in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Cool.
Well, let's take a few questions. We have some from live and some from before. Stacy asks, I have a 17-year-old son, and I'm curious, what is the best way to support him in his coming into more of his being as a man?
I love this question. And I love when mothers ask it. So he is at such a crucial age right now. And this is the moment where he is going to have to go through moments of dropping to his knees and not having mommy around to help him. And it's very important that as a mother, and I have no feeling of what it must actually feel like to be a mother and how deeply rooted that connection is to your child. But I'm still going to request that as a mother, you create distance between him in terms of the protection structures that you set up. You must refrain from telling him how to do something. You must refrain from telling him what he should be doing with his life. Going by the rhetoric that you know more than him because you've been here longer, which we all like to use a lot, which is just simply not true because he is here in a different time. He needs to feel the support from you. He needs to feel you showing confidence in him. He also needs to feel that when shit hits the fan, that you're inviting him to figure it out for himself, and mom is not going to come in to save the day. To let him know that I love you deeply beyond belief, but you must figure this out. And if he falls down crying, you wait, you sit back and you watch him cry. And of course, that's challenging. And you watch him cry and you see if he can pick himself up. and he'll get better, because it's a beautiful moment for a man where he's wiping his eyes and he's looking around, and he cries louder and he's looking around, and he throws a bigger tantrum and he's looking around, and nobody arrives. And now he has to suck it up and brush himself off and stand up. Then you can be there for him. Then you can say, yes, I knew you could do it. And you can wrap your arms around him and love him the way that you want to love him. But you must allow him to navigate himself through life and to come up against challenge alone, and to make mistakes alone, and to make his own terrible decisions alone. But letting him know that I am always here for you if you ever need to come to me. But there's such little confidence right now being shown in our young men, in men in general, that it's very important that we can give this to our children.
Wonderful. Why don't I go here?
Sure. No.
So this is a question, a pre-asked question from someone who signed up that they were pondering before we started. And it reads, my deepest fear, unsafe feeling comes from a program. The program kicks in as I become sexually aroused nearing orgasm. The program feels like, in quotations, lower energies are going to use the orgasmic energy waves to satisfy sexual abuse, lower energy cravings of disembodied beings. Remember the subway smoker in the movie Ghost? I don't know if I remember that, but this is a lifelong sexual component that disrupts our otherwise beautiful sexual relationship. Is this common? How to accept, love, and dissolve? Thanks and love.
The most terrifying point that I see people in the work that I do is the moment that orgasmic energy comes to the surface. There is absolute fear and trepidation that starts to just paralyze the person almost, because we have been told so many times that if that energy comes to the surface and starts directing things or moving through us, then we're bad. And we've been disciplined in order to control us, to shut that free-flowing energy down. So I'm not going to suggest that that person tries to do anything different or to change their experience. What I am going to invite them into is into the darkness of it. I'm assuming it's a woman who asked that question.
I'm not sure, but my instinct is the same, yeah.
Well, either or. If it's a man, then ejaculation is going to be a factor that I would need to communicate in terms of not going into ejaculation with it and instead circulating that energy or learning ways to circulate that energy. I feel it's probably from a woman, because for a man, we just come, and that's from the low level engagement. That's what happens. I would invite the person to accept all what she refers to or what he refers to as the low-lying traumatic energies, and to feed them with that energy. Because what you'll start to realize is that energy is so pure and so high in frequency that as she tries to feed this story that she's holding on to, or that he's holding on to, it's going to turn into something totally different and beyond their wildest expectations and their capacity for bliss and orgasmicness and pleasure. And it will be nothing but light. There may be an initial darkness that comes up in the expression, in the roar and the growl and the pain that might surface. But for me, being here as a human, we need to go into the dark just as much as we want to go into the light, because the darkness is even more powerful than the light. And the dark is not bad. Unconsciousness is bad. But if we go into the dark consciously, we automatically bring the principle of light with us. That's what healing is. That's what alchemy is. That's what's transmuting and transforming is. We use our consciousness and our awareness to bring the principle of light to the darkness. And that's what exposes and burns and transmutes everything. So go into it. Fall into the misery and the demise. And to reclaim our pleasure, we have to reclaim our pain. And it's all juicy. But we're gonna have to be willing to face that terror, which is juicy in itself.
We have a few questions from women here related to how to communicate. I think it's a distortion or something they see in their man to him. For example, at times I bring a challenge to my man in an aggressive, toxic way. How can a man really receive a message of truth from his woman, and how can I bring it?
So is she saying that she's bringing this communication to him in a toxic and aggressive way?
Right now she is. And so I think she wants
Okay.
to learn how can she bring it? She doesn't, I think
Okay.
I'm reading that this, because there's
So-
another one that follows it similarly, that a similar experience with another person and her partner. So how to bring that to a man, I think is what they're saying. And then how can a man receive it?
Mhm. One way she could support this is by approaching him and basically communicating with him very directly and saying, you know, sweetheart, I have all these experiences and feelings in my body and emotions that are moving through me. And I also at the same time have such a desire to devote myself to you and to love you and to be here for you and with you. And I would really appreciate if we could set up some time where I can lay down and you can sit beside me and you can either hold my hand or you can just be there, and you can allow me and give me full permission to say and communicate and express all the toxicity that I'm feeling in my body. And can you do that in a way where you're not taking it personally? Because I really love you so much and I want to get closer with you. And this is a way that will really support me in doing this. So that's one way that she can just simply request it. And depending where he's at in his process, if he is open to supporting her and he has already validated himself enough internally that he won't be too rocked by her criticisms, then it should be a beautiful experience for both of them and something that brings them far closer together. But she absolutely cannot just keep it in. It's only toxic because it's not being expressed, because she feels it as being toxic in her body. He is not toxic and she is not toxic, but the lack of expression is creating that feeling. She can also do a lot of this work on her own if she feels to, you know, through different embodiment practices, through dancing it out, through just feeling it out in her body on her own. But it's always more powerful when we can share it with someone.
Mm.
So that would be my advice.
And the corollary, the male bringing that to the female. What's what's a view on that that's healthy, not rageful or angry or whiny?
Yes. Well, I would absolutely request that a man first removes himself from this space just based on the nature of our energy. It's far more penetrative. So it's better if he actually goes into his own space and learns to touch himself and put his hands on himself and breathe into himself and allow himself to roar and scream and to really open himself up to being in all these pains and anguishes. And when he feels ready, to invite the woman in, or to then go to her and request, hey, I really need to do a lot of healing in this area of my body. Can you be deeply loving with me and unconditional if I lay down and just start to cry or just start to feel the reality of what I'm being in right now? Now, he never wants to have that be his way of relating with her in general. It needs just to be a moment in time. And as soon as he's processed through what he needs to process through, he needs to be there firm again. But a lot of men I see who are going through trauma, especially in the spiritual circles, men are just always in this state of processing in a very feminine way. And she's just being dumped on and she's almost like his life coach now. And that's definitely, you know, that's going to be the end of a relationship pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Chris, can you take a couple more questions? I know we've been going on a little while here.
Of course. I just want to clarify lastly on what I was saying is why it's much more supportive for the woman to communicate it directly to the man immediately and to be in that experience is because she processes through feeling awareness penetrating her and being seen. when she gets the gaze, when she feels the energy and the frequency of his seeingness, it actually functions like a flashlight or like a torch. And it allows her to stay present in her experience as he stays present enough to follow her as she goes through the ebbing and flowing of her releasing. But for her to do it on her own, just to go into a room, it's like where's the lightning? Where's the spark? And as men, we serve as pretty good sparks because of how our energy functions, but also because most women's trauma is around the masculine. So, and this also for the men, allowing your woman to hit you, to thump you on the chest, to slap you, not in a dysfunctional way, not in a unconscious way, but in an invitory way, where you're inviting her, saying, I feel your aggression, slap me. So she gets to feel the firmness in him. So she can start to actively push up against him. And he can practice staying strong and staying firm and staying non-reactive as she gets to basically wear that energy out. So now she can drop into relaxation. Rustling with each other is such a beautiful polarity thing that can totally open a woman and alleviate the levels of burdening that she's feeling. Yeah. And the reason the man is better off going away at the beginning, because when he's really in that anger or that ferocity, it can almost be injurious to her because he's penetrating her with that energy and she's taking that in, because the feminine is more like a receptacle. Yeah, you guys are receiving from the universe and you really feel it and taste it in order to make sense of it. So it is better that he steps away momentarily, does the main processing work, and then can come back just to be loved on by her. Yeah.
It's so strong, Chris.
Yeah.
The feedback in the chat has been so strong as well. It's just people are really resonating. Do you want to ask that one?
Yeah, one more from a
And then I'll ask one more from there.
so one more from the live, one more from the pre-call. In previous videos, you have said how there is little to no difference between what is happening externally and internally with us. You have also said how whatever someone is looking for outside of themselves for, it is a reflection of what they are looking for internally. Can you clarify this? I don't understand what you mean by this and how those two align.
Well, I forget everything immediately after it's been said. So can
you said this about anything?
so can you? No, that's definitely me. But can you just repeat the first part that you'd like me to answer first, just so I can be concise on it and I don't forget?
In previous videos, you have said how there is little to no difference between what is happening externally and internally with us.
Right. Okay.
Also said, okay, we'll stop.
So let's go with that one first. So when I say there's no difference to what's happening externally and internally, is because there's no difference between internal and external. It's all emanating from the internal, first and foremost. So let's say you have a bunch of trauma patterns and physical holdings in your body that don't allow you to breathe and to be open and to feel the fullness of you. And you've got dysfunctional thought patterns around money that are rooted in your body. This is basically just going to be reflected to you outside of your physicality in whatever you're getting back in terms of the mirroring that you're getting back from people, from situations, from your level of abundance. So when we do inner work and remove or allow the work to actually open a lot of these places and to clarify a lot of these previous belief systems that have been blocking us up and disconnecting us, now everything can move through us far more unencumbered. And when that occurs, now our external life will move far more unencumbered. Even if the same types of situations are occurring, we will not experience them internally as stress, or we will not experience them internally as a lack of abundance. Because now our first currency, which is life force, is fully open, it's fully flowing. So it's not so much that the external is changing, but how we're interfacing with everything outside of us is shifting dramatically. Literally, our complete experience of what a life is and how a life functions changes based on the trauma patterns that we are holding and the beliefs that we hold in our body. So for me, that's why I almost just kind of toss it away and go, oh, there's no difference between them, because that allows me to be far more accountable for the internal and to dedicate my energy and my awareness and my time to the internal, to create my life internally, so I don't have to get up and work so hard, so that the energy can then move outwards and start to open life for me. And that's also so much of the work that I do. I just show up, and once my internals are in check, then the work will be done for me with the person that needs to feel that. But it's never me that's doing it. So that's the first answer to the first question.
And I think you've covered this too, but I will repeat it. You have also said how whatever someone is looking for outside of themselves it is the reflection of what they're looking for internally. Can you clarify this?
I mean that on the deepest spiritual levels, because there's nothing to look for. There's nothing to do here. And we're all so busy all the time. Well, I got to go to this place and I got to be here at this time. And also a part of me wants to recognize that can also be very entitled when someone is starving and they have no money and they're homeless and they have children who are going, not being able to eat. But still, there's nothing for that person to do here other than provide for that situation. It's through our level of complication that we become so fatigued. And usually what we're looking for has very little to do with our primal needs and our base foundational needs. What we're looking for is just entertainment, so we can appear to be more special than the next person. When in actual fact, the deepest work is coming to terms with that we are the simplest, plainest, most normal human being on the face of the planet. And the more that we can come back into accepting our normality, the more we can be in what I'm going to call enlightenment. To be enlightened is to just realize your humanity. Like, I'm not magic. I'm not better than anyone. I'm not bigger than anyone. I'm still, I'm here 33 years and I'm still trying to figure out as a human just how to sit down properly. So we've got, we don't need all the problems that we create for ourselves. And yes, there's a romanticized version of that I like to play with. And also there's just the truth of the matter, that most of the things that we do are meaningless. And we could be spending that time accumulating more life and sharing that life with another person or with other people in an unrushed way. It's through the internal that we become externally abundant. If you move abundantly, if you carry yourself abundantly, if you speak abundantly, if you breathe abundantly, then outside of you, whatever that means, will start to reflect that back. People will literally come and hand you things that you were looking for previously. Taking on the posture of I'm trying to develop myself and I'm trying to learn new things and I'm trying to figure stuff out. All that is telling you is that I'm not good enough the way I am. It's all avoidance. And the scariest thing for people is realizing how tiny we are and insignificant in our beautiful giganticness. I have to bring duality in this.
Oh, we could have a whole conversation with you just about busyness and distraction, and we didn't even get to that. So I'm so glad you just brought it in there, because we had wanted to get to that. I want to ask one more question from the
Sure.
chat. Can you share the most magnificent and divine vision for the world where conscious ascended relationships are alive, thriving, and co-creating together? What does that vision look like for you?
It's going to look different to me than, for all of us individually, it's going to look different. For me, I dream of a life of being able to walk outside of my front door and being able to look at another person and feeling the truth that they're also in contact with, feeling the level of self-love and acceptance and the level of nervous system exhale that they've allowed themselves to go into, where everything is okay. And if it's not okay, everything is going to be okay. What I'm looking for is just something very simple. And my deepest vision is that people treat themselves lovingly and can do their best to be loving with other people, and to also realize that we're all human and we're all here to learn something, and none of us are going to ever be perfect. But it's just the humanity that's where there's a level of embodiment, where people are really here, and I can feel that from people. And so I don't have to do this work anymore because it's ridiculous. The fact I have this job is ridiculous. Sometimes I hear myself and I see myself and I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? And I want to say, never have a guru. No one ever needs one. I am not a guru. I know I have a shiny scarf, but unfortunately, I also have to play into what people need to see first in order to even take someone as being serious in what they do. And that's ridiculous. But I will play into that as long as I have to play into that in order to be able to reach people with what I need to reach people with. Yeah. All you need is the willingness to feel yourself, because that is who has put you here. And that is what is attempting to guide you and steer you through your life. Nothing else matters. So that's my finish point.
Well,
So good.
if you have anything else, feel free. I don't know if there's any, do you want to point people to social media or website? I mean, we didn't even get into your relationship to social media, but
Which is fascinating.
which is, I'll share that with Teresa. But if there's any kind of plug you want to make, by all means, feel free.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of content and podcasts and videos and articles that date back many years at this point. I have a large body of work that's available online. People can go to my website. It's awakenedintent.com. And my Instagram, I think, is Chris Bale Awakened. And my Facebook is just Chris Bale. But that's basically where all my content and stuff goes up.
Cool.
So
Yeah, we'll link to those too in the replay below. I'll tag all of that so people can easily find that.
You're such a good team. I adored being here and speaking with both of you.
Likewise.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Quite similarly felt here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.